This is In Between Them, a podcast where we uncover what it really felt like to be a child of divorce. I am Shannon Darrow, and each episode brings honest stories from brave adults who lived through this as children. This is In Between Them. Let's get going. Leslie, thank you so much for being on In Between Them. I really appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you because, I know that you're a psychotherapist. And so I think that adds a different dimension because of your own awareness and education around different pieces of this. If you want to just give the audience a little bit of a background of you so that people can connect, people can understand a little bit of who you are, and then we can kind of get into the details.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Well, I became a therapist because I was actually in a marriage that was not so great. And I had my own things that happened because of my own divorce. They always say you marry your parents, and that's exactly what I did. So I was going through a really rough time in my marriage, and I actually became, I don't know if I can say this, but I became suicidal. So at the time I ended up, hospitalizing myself. And through that experience, I realized that this is exactly what I want to do. I want to help other people not ever have to feel this way. Unfortunately, it took me many more years to leave the marriage, but it helped me understand a little bit better on how to help other people. As my parents' divorce was very, very hard. It happened when I was about 6 years old. I don't know exactly when they told me about it because there was a lot of trauma that was happening. I'm actually from Argentina. So my mother's mother had come to the United States in July. My grandfather passed away really suddenly. He, in a very tragic way from my father's side a month later. And then just a few months later, I believe in December or January, they separated. So there was a lot of grief that they were going through. Obviously, they were not ready for a divorce. They were not ready to support their children because they were grieving themselves. So there was a lot of isolation, a lot of myself taking care of my sisters who are only a year and 3.5 years, younger than me. So there was a lot of trauma that created for me to be a therapist, and I want to help people with that as well.
Wow. So let me just make sure I got all that right, because that is a very important part to start from. So you have two siblings, two sisters that are younger.
Right.
And when you say they came to America, or was it your grandmother who came?
My maternal grandparents came here, and okay. My grandfather had already come here a few years before. But my grandmother came in July. Then my paternal grandfather passed in August, and my parents split or separated around January of the following year. So within 6 months, a lot of things happened.
Yes. And when your parents split, were you in America or in Argentina?
In Argentina. Yeah, I came here a few years, almost 30 years now, but yeah.
Okay. So this all happened when you were there. Exactly. And so now that makes more sense as to grandparents left and also passed, and you guys were there, and then all this happened. So that is, wow. Right. That is a lot.
My biological father still lives in Argentina. I'm here with my grandmother and her, family, but yes, my rest of my family still lives in Argentina.
Okay.
I have two other siblings too over there from his side.
Okay. So you're around 6 years old, you said?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. So, this is interesting because you're not in America. So I don't know what does divorce look like in another country? Is it similar based on your experience now, or what are the differences just from that kind of immediate, hey, we're getting divorced? What happens in Argentina when that happens?
Well, in Argentina, we're very pro psychology. I think every other person is a psychologist, or everybody has been to a psychologist. So it's a little bit different in that way, in that they put you in therapy immediately. So immediately we went to therapy. All three of us have a lot of trauma from that time, obviously. So there's very little remembering of that time. So there's a lot of black holes that we really I have tried so much in therapy to try and remember, but it's not there. But we were put into therapy, all of us. My parents had a very horrible divorce. They were, fighting all the time for everything under the sun. So it was very, very hard and traumatic for all of us, for sure.
Wow. So what happens? They get divorced. Who do you live with, or what does that parenting time look like?
Yeah. So at the time, we lived in an apartment, and my father wanted to have all of the apartments. He just wanted my mother to just sell it and immediately without caring where she went or didn't go. And so he wanted immediately to sell it and have his part. So my mom had to go and get some money and buy her own house. So she pretty much had to hustle it, and that's where I learned probably the hustling myself, because she really had to work really hard to try and get her own place. So we ended up buying a house. I believe we were 7 years old because they were fighting for this apartment.
Mhm.
And so my mom got a house. So I ended up going to live with her. My dad ended up going to live with his mother, and that's where he stayed for a while. So when we would go visit, it would be to his house at my grandmother's house essentially.
Which probably in a lot of ways makes it maybe even a little more fun. You know what I mean? Going to see dad and grandma when you're that young.
hmm Well, this grandma is very particular. She's very military style. I loved her. I really did. She's very straight up and she had a very hard childhood as well. So she's very, she loves you, but in her own way.
Mhm.
So yes, but it was, hard. Again, she just lost her husband. She's very
Yeah.
lost herself. It was very sudden. I believe he was, just 58 years old when he passed. So he was very young. It was very traumatic the way that he passed as well. So there was a lot going on, as well, to have a bunch of kids, because we were three of us,
Yeah, yeah.
running around, screaming and yelling and playing when you're, grieving too.
Absolutely. So, how often did you go and see your dad while you were living with your mom when you like right away there?
Well, we would go as often as we could. I know that I had a conversation with him many years, after that, about that time, because he just wanted to have his own life. He said it himself. He was like young and very selfish, and he just wanted to have his own life. So we would go with him sometimes, and he would be very much what we call a Disney parent. So we would go and have fun, and it would be all, handy dandy. My mom just handled all of the hard things of everyday life. And they had a back and forth relationship between them too. So that was very hard and confusing for us too. My dad is very an angry person or has a lot of like anger issues. So whenever he would come back into our lives, it was very hard because, he would just like put a lot of like rules and be very harsh on us. And my mom is very much like, everybody do whatever you want. And so it was very hard with both of their parenting styles when they clashed so hard with each other. To not have very confusing, life, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. So when you say they came back in, I can't remember exactly how you said it. Do you mean they got back together and then would break up again? So they got divorced, but then they would still like reconcile and then be apart.
Right. So this is a time where it was kind of like hard because you wouldn't know if they were back together or not. They weren't really saying anything, but dad would come around and it would just be very, hard. We're kind of from we're from a small town. So he lived close by. And so he did come and pick me up in the morning to take me to school. Like he would still be involved into a lot of things. But there were also a lot of things that he didn't do, like let's say financially, where he just didn't help at all. So again, it was really hard because they would come back. They had been together. My mom, that was like her first kiss, her first everything. She was only like 14 when she met him, and he was 18. So they were kind of like had gone together. In Argentina, like everybody's kind of like one big group, right? Like everybody knows everybody. It's a really small town. So all of their friends were very like her family, and they're like they were all pretty much together. So it was very hard to separate those two, I would imagine. And so they would come back together and then they would leave. And then it would kind of like, and then when they actually did, start seeing other people, it was very hard. My dad had a lot of jealousy issues. So if we want to get into that, we can get into that. But it was kind of crazy for a kid.
Do you remember how many years they kind of were hanging on, so to speak, before they started seeing other people? Like, was it many years or was it 2 years? I mean, like, at what age were you navigating, oh, they're together, oh, they're not together, oh, maybe they're together? What did that look like from a time frame perspective?
It was a long time. I know that I like to be the nosy kid, and at times I was kind of like, I don't want to hear these conversations, but I kind of really want to know what's going on. So I heard a lot of conversations that in hindsight now as an adult, I kind of see like I should not have heard, and I don't have the context of exactly what happened. But later on in my own divorce, these came to play because a lot of these memories did come back and, played a big role. But yes, they would come back and forth. I think my mom got very ill when I was 10. She had a surgery. And so I know at that time, there was a second mortgage my father took out on the house, and there was kind of like all of these for himself, not for my mother. So while she was ill, he kind of like did all of these things in the background. And so around that time, I think my mom was kind of like, I'm on my own, and kind of started going on her own. And then we came here when I was 12, 12 and a half. So by that time, between those 2 years when they were actually not together, that was really, really hard, because then he just stopped everything completely. And so my mom was on her own. She, because of her illness and the surgery that came from it, she had to relearn how to speak, how to walk, how to do everything. And she has
Wow.
3 kids, and she's completely on her own because, her parents are here. So
Yeah.
for us kids, it was really hard to, navigate that.
Yeah.
And then whenever my dad would come back, it would be arguments, and, it was very, very hard to watch too.
Yeah. I'm How did that make you feel like when you reflect on being 9, 10, 11, 12 during those times and seeing your mom, I mean, sounds like helpless in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
and probably needing a lot.
Yeah.
What do you remember from that time?
So there was a lot of issues with my mother and I. I am very, strong-minded, and like she always told me like I never asked you to be the father in the really in the kind of take these responsibilities that you're taking on. But in my mind, I'm not seeing anyone else taking responsibilities for my siblings, for everything that goes on in the house. She was obviously out working all the time, making a name for herself as well. So it was really hard, very conflicted between her and I, because I would take matters into action. I would just do what needed to be done, right? Like if my sisters need to be fed or need to something need to happen, I was there. So there was a lot of conflict between her and I for taking the role that didn't belong to me. But
Mhm.
in my mind, I was kind of like, well, nobody else is being responsible in this. So I had a
Right,
lot of things that I worked through in therapy over my parents, lack of what I believe was like being responsible.
right, right. I mean, that makes a ton of sense considering the fact that you said she had to relearn to walk and talk and all of that
Hmm.
at the time that you have two younger siblings, not that you're that old, but you're
Hmm.
the oldest. So you are going to take on certain roles. Do you also feel like you took care of her, or was it more that you took care of your siblings?
I think I took in more of them. I was very worried about them and like protecting them. I'm very much like a very empathetic person, and it's just like a highly sensitive person. So I really wanted to make sure that they didn't see mom in the state that I was. So I was very much like trying to help her, but trying to be like the big girl, like put the
Yeah.
big girl pants, and kind of like no, like having protecting them from seeing that, because I witnessed a lot of things, and like that they didn't get to see, because I got involved when I wasn't supposed to, but in a way, I was kind of like I saw myself as the protector.
Yeah.
So I try to protect her from my dad and from other people and from other things that were kind of happening. But I'm only a kid, so
Yeah.
I took a
Yeah.
lot of responsibilities that didn't belong to me, and that was
Yeah.
hard because a lot of weight to carry as a little child.
What is one way that you carried a lot of weight then that you look back now and as a psychotherapist and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe I took that on."
I mean, I think all of this, right? I think none of that was my responsibility. I just kind of, I had, conflicts with my parents on how I felt about them. I didn't feel like they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. So I never really had that kind of like attachment to them. Later
Mhm.
on, I recognized as I started studying and knowing more about attachment theory, it made a lot of sense on why. My sister was born a year after me with a lot of medical issues. So they spent a lot of time going to the hospital and making sure that she was okay. So I was pretty much raised by my grandparents, who ended up coming over here. So I was pretty much like my attachment is more to them.
Mm.
So I didn't really have too much of an attachment to them, and now I understand a lot better why there was kind of like that kind of like, okay, I need to help no matter what. Like, you guys are not responsible for these things
Mhm.
because I wasn't taken care of by them.
Mhm.
So not in
Yeah.
a way that it was bad, but, because obviously they had to care of my sister and, take her to the hospital, make sure she was okay. But, for myself, it was just like, it just didn't have that attachment that,
Yeah.
usually people have
Yeah.
with their parents.
It's an amazing example of how kids will just step up and do stuff.
Mhm.
And this is a total tangent that we do not have to go on, but it's funny because there's so much conversation right now about how kids are so coddled and kids don't do anything for themselves. And it's really harming these younger generations of kids. And when you hear people talk about how kids should be doing more for themselves and then the argument as to why or are they capable and you tell this kind of story and it's like when kids feel the gap, they
Mhm.
can take care of themselves. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that they should, but it's an interesting example of how capable children can be when they need to be or when
Mhm.
they perceive that they need to be, you know?
Right.
And I think it really goes to show how strong children are. And then also, I think that's why a lot of times they do end up carrying so much that they shouldn't be.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes I think parents realize that they're strong and so they put more on them, kind of like, oh, they've got it. I don't need to do that type of thing. So I think it's a
Right.
lot of different layers, but that's just a really interesting example of you just kind of really doubling down on, no, I'm good. I've got it. And then explaining that your attachment really lied more with your grandparents.
Mhm.
That also makes some sense there, why that almost seemed probably easier for you or more like just you just needed to do it, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
So, do you recall from 10 to I think you said 12 and a half, you came to the United States. Did anything else happen in that 10 to 12 time frame that was significant, or was it really that your parents finally kind of stopped going back and forth, being together, not together, and then, somehow you came to be in the United States? So what did that look like, and did you know you were coming, and, what was that like?
Well, at that time, the thing was that since my mom couldn't really work, or, like, we had a lot of financial issues. And so, one thing my siblings and I, we laugh, but it's not funny, is that we're always, and it's one of the arguments that I always had with my ex-husband, was that we're always overstocked in food, right? Like, we will, like, have at our house, you will never go hungry. Like, our fridges are always packed to the rim, and I know it's wasteful, but it's a trauma response that all of us have, because we remember having nothing in the fridge whatsoever. Like, we laugh and we call, like, something called what is it that we call it? The oh my God, my daughter asks me all the time, pasta soup. She calls it pasta soup, and essentially it's just like broth, like the nor,
Yeah,
broth with just some little, like, noodles or whatever. And that's like what we ate, because that's what, as a 8-year-old, 10-year-old, this is what you know how to make. We're not going to make,
yeah.
gourmet meals, and that was, cheap and available, and we had that. But I do remember, like, being, one time I was trying to make a cake. This one was a very traumatic, like, remembering memory that I have. I remember trying to make a cake and going to get an egg, and so I tried to get the egg and I opened it up, and it was like rotten. Like, the egg was like completely rotten because it had been sitting there, like, and it was pretty much nothing else in the fridge. So when my father and his family all they have businesses. We have what is called carniceria, which is like a butcher shops. But in these butcher shops in Argentina, you have a lot more. You have milk, you have all kinds of different products. So he had all of this availability to provide at least that for his children, but he did not. So that's like the memory that we all have, all three of us, is seeing the fridge very empty. And so all three of us are very much, like, that
Wow.
scarcity, kind of like you said, like that survival skills that we all get. We all have that naturally. And I think as children, like, they kind of take that on. One of the main things, for example, I have a lot of friends that are also social workers. And because I think naturally we gravitate a lot of the times with people who have similar, like experiences. And some of them were like the super A student, and so everybody was like, oh, they're totally fine, they're fine, right? Like they're getting great grades, they're doing amazing, they're like. And then you have the other one that's like doing really poorly and not having any. So both of them are struggling. One is overcompensating, and the other one is undercompensating because they're such in survival mode. But they're both in survival mode. So I
Mhm.
think that's kind of like the other part to remember, that sometimes, like I have a lot of clients, sometimes they're like, oh, like that child is totally fine. I have one child that's like, a lot of problems, and it's like the other child needs help too. Just because they're doing great does not mean that they're doing great. They're just
Right.
like overcompensating to not bring any problems, to kind of like,
Yes.
give the parent, space to kind of,
Yeah.
have time to be with the other sibling that needs more help. But then that kind of creates this kind of like abandonment for them as well.
Absolutely. Well, I think when you have children that appear to have it together,
Hmm.
that's almost like a red flag because kids don't
Hmm.
have it together. I mean, they're
Oh yeah.
kids, right? So when you see a kid that does, I think what they're having to suppress in order to show that kind of um, almost like a perfect front,
Hmm.
that level of perfection that, like you said, they're not rocking the boat. They're kind of not trying to cause any conflict. They're trying to smooth things over for everyone, not saying what they really think or feel because
Hmm.
they don't want to upset anyone. That is a whole nother bag of problems. It just
Yeah.
doesn't look the same as the kid who's falling apart.
Right.
And so I do think you're right that a lot of times we go to the one who's really struggling, like, how can we help you? And the other one is just kind of like brushed off, and abandonment would make sense, even though people aren't intending that. It's just kind
Right.
of the nature of what's happening.
Yeah, being a parent is not easy. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
No,
We're all
no,
gonna get
it's
something wrong. Like, we joke around with
yes.
my sisters. We're three girls, and actually we're five girls because my dad has two other girls. But the three girls from this marriage, it's kind of, we always joke around on how we're gonna mess up our kids somehow, some
Oh,
way.
yeah,
So,
of course.
it's really hard. No matter what, even if you have three children, all of them are gonna be, completely different. Me and my
Mhm.
siblings are completely different from each other. So, and it's, every person's going to see it differently, no matter what,
Yeah,
even if they come from the same household with the same parents.
yeah, absolutely. So, do you remember leaving? And what did your dad know you guys were leaving? What did that look like leaving Argentina?
So at the time, we came to visit. So we came to visit, and then my mom. This had happened. It was 96. So this has happened literally 1 year after she had that surgery that she had, like, no, almost no chance of survival because it was in her spine. So at the time in Argentina, in, like the early 90s, we don't have the type of technology that we have here, obviously. And so her chances of survival were really small, primarily with it being in her spine. So she had tumors in her spine. So that's one of the things that kind of, we came to visit. And then I think at one point, like, the decision was made. I could hear them too, like, on the phone arguing. And like, I'm a very empathetic person, very like highly sensitive. I can sense those feelings too, so I could tell something was not right. So in a way, like, my mom sold it to us like, oh, we get to go to Disneyland and we get to like do all of these things. And my siblings were like, yeah, awesome. In my head, I'm like, oh, something is just like, just didn't sit right with me. And so, yeah, so, we stayed here. And then my dad came over a few months later with my grandma. And from his story on his side was that he tried to come to take us back, because obviously the travel authorization only said you can
Mhm.
go and you need to come
Right,
back.
right.
So, like, he tried to come back, and like, legally he was thinking of going to the police and doing all these things. But then he saw that we were okay, according to him. And and so we ended up staying. My mother wants to celebrate every year. When we came in December for Christmas. And every year it's just very, to me, it's not, it's kind of like a win. It's kind of like a war, right? Like, one person won but another person lost.
Yeah.
Like, there was a lot of things like I struggle with the most. I didn't really adjust very well to like how life is here in the United States. And it was really hard. I wanted to go back home. I almost did. But I didn't want to leave my sisters. So it was very hard as an almost teenager and then teenager
Yeah.
to be here in a different place.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the people that have told me stories of being around preteen age where they have to move just out of their family home.
Mhm.
off out of their neighborhood, or they have to change schools, and you came to America from Argentina. Like, talk
Mhm.
about just completely disrupting everything that was stable for you. Even
Right.
if your parents weren't stable, the world around you was, like you said, small community, everyone knew each other. I mean,
Mhm.
that's got to feel very safe. So then to have that just kind of not a part of your life anymore, I can only imagine. And then feeling that pull of, well, I want to be with my sisters.
Mhm.
I mean, those are big, those are very, very big feelings to be having at 12 years old, you
Yeah.
know?
No, it was a lot, definitely,
Yeah.
for sure.
I wanted to ask you, when your mom did have those health problems, obviously I mean, if you didn't know if she was going to make it, it's very severe health problems.
Mhm.
To have that experience also as an 11-year-old,
Mhm.
I mean, do you see how did that do you see how that affected you? And at the time, were you aware? Were you communicating with your siblings about it? Like, what was that conversation like?
Yeah, I think I mean they didn't really share 100%. I just again I'm very sensitive and I was very like into conversations that wasn't supposed to be. So I didn't understand 100% how severe this was, but I do remember leaving my mom in the hospital and very clearly, I mean to this day, I remember looking out the window like like as we're in the car looking, as we're driving away. I remember seeing it and kind of saying like, "This is the last." Like in my head, I'm like, "This is the last time that I see my mom." It's like very
Wow.
hard to say,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
in my mind, I'm like a 10-year-old. In my mind, I'm like, "This is like I'm leaving, and I'm going to remember this because this is the last time that I see my mom."
Yeah.
So that was really hard. And then you got to go home and like you got to like act tough because you got two little ones. And then my sisters always saw me as kind of like this kind of like so like they always say like kind of like a motherly figure, so I gotta like act tough and be like, oh no, like like let's do homework, let's do this, like whatever, and act like nothing was really going on. So
Mhm.
definitely was
Yeah.
a lot of like hiding. And I
Yeah.
mean I still have, I was like with my therapist literally this week talking about panic attacks in the middle of the night about dying. I still am 42 years old and I still have those,
Yeah.
where I just wake up screaming like no,
Yeah.
like and just thinking about death. So
Yeah.
still very
Yeah.
hard.
Gosh. Um, when you came here, what did you then communicate with your dad? Because you said he stayed in Argentina.
Hmm.
So what did that look like? So you're 12, 13. You've got two younger sisters, and your dad is in Argentina, and you're here with your mom and your grandmother and your
Hmm.
grandfather, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, what do those years look like from a parenting perspective and from a communication with your dad, who's obviously not local, perspective?
Well, I mean, in those days, on the phone, it was really hard. I think it was like $1 a minute, right? Like, so
Yeah.
it was really hard to be able to speak on the phone. We would speak very, like ever so often. And, we would send emails. This was like back then when AOL was a thing. So it was like really, really new technology type of thing. So we would send, emails sometimes, definitely like, letters back and forth, like the old school mail. That's, what we would do. My sisters chose not to speak to him, and they haven't spoken to him. So I'm the only one that really like speaks to him, and we probably will get into like how after my divorce, I just haven't been able to speak with him for the past 3.5 years. So it's definitely been like I'm the only one that kind of tries to keep that connection with that side of the family. But yeah, we would just correspond like that. And then eventually, of course, you're a teenager and you're kind of doing your own thing, and then he would kind of like make me feel guilty for like not like keeping up with him or whatever. And I'm a teenager, I don't want to talk to
Mhm.
my parents. It's like
Mhm.
it's nothing against you, but there was a lot of like manipulation and a lot of like guilt tripping for not answering or not wanting to speak with him or things like that too.
Which is amazing that you felt that from him being so far away. and really limited contact because
Hmm.
of technology and cost, So can you give an example of what that guilt tripping or that manipulation looked like from afar like that?
Well, I think yeah, it would be sent very subtly, you know, like he's very much, he's very much probably a covert narcissist as well, where it was kind of like, like, oh, but you don't send me messages, or you don't, like, oh, you don't contact me as much. Like, do you like, like, are you okay? Do you still care about me? Am I losing you? Like, things like that, where it was kind of like, yeah, no, of course, like meant for you to say like, of course I love you, of course I care about you, like, kind of like, soothe their ego,
Yeah,
versus like, hey, I'm a teenager who just wants to hang out with my friends, and it's very
yeah,
natural for me not to want to speak to you as my parent.
yeah,
It's, I don't, it's not, that's not my number one priority as a teen, is,
right,
like keeping in touch with my parents. It's nothing against you, but
yeah,
obviously to him, it's, you gotta like keep up with him too.
right.
And with my
Wow.
mom, it was kind of problematic too, because like I had to be there for my siblings. I didn't really get to have the childhood that everybody talks about of like, oh, I got to go out with my friends. I mean, I did go out with my friends, but either my siblings tagged along or I couldn't go out because I was taking care of them, because my mom was working. So I didn't really have, like they talk about like, oh, like I got to go places. I went to places sometimes, yes, but for the most part, I felt very responsible for my siblings. So I would not go out with my friends and do things.
Hmm, interesting.
Hmm.
Why did you continue to connect with your dad, but your siblings didn't?
I don't know. They were always very much. I remember when we were in Argentina still, like sitting down. I remember we had the phone, and I remember sitting down with my mom, and all three of them, or three of us, were there. And I remember the sister that follows me. She just didn't want to speak with them, and I felt very pressured to say like, oh, I also don't want to hang out with you, and it was like I remember also feeling that kind of manipulation from my mom's side, because my mom tends to do that too, where she kind of like looks at you and kind of like expects something from you, and you know what she's expecting, and you kind of comply. So I remember that part, and I just didn't want to. I didn't want to say like I don't want to hang out with your dad. Like I wanted to hang out with him. First of all, because it was fun, right? Like he's the Disney parent. Like he buys me stuff. We go to like the mall and we do things with
Yeah,
him. And and I like my grandma. She was stern, but I appreciated that she was like, in her own
yeah,
way, loving me.
yeah,
She did a lot of like, cute things. I like spending time with her.
yeah.
And so I think, that was really hard on both ends, kind of having this need to please them both all the time.
Mhm,
It was really hard. I'm like, as a kid, who do you go with? And
mhm,
they're both kind of pulling for your attention and making you feel guilty for not choosing each other. It's and then you got to like look at your siblings, and like, and so it was really hard to be yourself. Like I wanted to have a relationship with my dad. I didn't want to not have one and not
mhm.
see him. I was kind of like, okay, you girls don't want to go, that's cool, but it was kind of like, you know expected of me to say like, oh, I don't want to hang out with you you know
Inter Did you ever talk with your sisters about it? Like, "Hey, why don't you guys wanna come?" Or did they say, "Why do you wanna go?"
They were very much, I don't want to say brainwashed, but they were brainwashed by my mom. It was kind of like a very much like who wins situation. It's kind of like I win, and you
Yeah.
lose type of a thing. So I don't know exactly, like all of the things, later on as they grew up, like I know my my younger sister, as we got older, like, she literally would call me every single time she was, had drank a little bit, and have all these like deep conversations about her dad, and that lasted for a while, and then like she just never did anything with that. And I think they've never gone to therapy, and they don't intend to go to therapy. And I went to therapy for many years to kind of keep myself from like, why don't they go to therapy and work on this, and spend many times in trying to save them again. Like,
Mhm.
if they will go to therapy, they will feel better. Like, you don't have to speak with them, but at least let go of that.
Yeah,
So I mean, but then, I believe in therapy because it's helped me so much.
yeah. It's amazing that it sounds like the 3 of you, were so close,
Hmm.
but you so different,
Hmm.
Not only in, like, that caregiver role, but and the protector and the shielder and all of that. but then also the one that said, I'm not going to be brainwashed. I'm going to do my own thing, you
Hmm.
know, and to have that ability to see, and maybe it wasn't that you were seeing it then for what it was, but you were at least feeling something that you were like, this doesn't work for me. So I'm
Hmm.
not going along with it, and I feel that as though, and I don't know for certain, but usually siblings all will feel that way or not. They'll all kind of side with one parent. If that parent is doing that type of thing, it can tend to be successful to the group.
Hmm.
Um, so it's interesting how you kind of separated from that a little bit. As you reflect on that piece with your awareness and your education, do you know why you maybe didn't feel the way they did and really were more confident to kind of say, no, I'm going to have a relationship with him?
I think maybe because of that attachment, I didn't really have that attachment to either of them. So I
Yeah.
was kind of like a person from the outside looking in into like, okay, what is this situation? And I've always been that person of like kind of like outside the box thinking. And I teach that all
Mhm.
the time when I'm in therapy as a therapist, because you got to have outside of the box, like, okay, what does this look like if you were a fly on the wall? Like what is
Mhm.
this situation really like? And I think I was very mature since I was very young into kind of recognizing like, there is no like there's two coins of there's two sides to a coin here. I was not going to just go with one. Like my mom's favorite saying has always been, when I say you jump, you say how high. And I was like, what? No, like what is that? Since I was very little, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what do you mean, what are we jumping, where like what? So to her it was kind of like, no, this is what you do. And so my sisters complied with that. I was always the problematic one, the one more like my dad. And later on, there were a lot of conflicts as I got older, because my sisters would listen to me because I was pretty much the one that was there. Like granted, my mother had to work. I get it. But, she struggled a lot with depression. She struggled a lot with like a lot of different things. So if my mom was home, she was like sleeping. She was like sleeping, or she had a migraine, or she had something going on, and she was just like unavailable. And so even if she was there, she was not there. So
Mhm.
I would take my siblings to, whatever. Like once I got a car, I was pretty much the chauffeur. Like I was pretty much even more responsibilities were put on me. Now you're
Mhm.
taking them here. Now you're taking them there. They want to do this. Like I started working really young. I started working when I was 15 and a half. I like hustled it and got the people to be like, oh, come on, let me like, work here so I could have my own money. And in my own money, I spent it buying like, us Christmas for the Christmas tree, like, so even then, like my first paycheck was really used to help the family, but nobody asked me. My mom was very much right into that. Like she never asked me for it. I just felt the responsibility that had to be done. Like she needed a protector too, and she never had it. So
Mhm.
I feel like I took on that role that didn't really belong to me, but kind of like you said, children are very much take responsibilities when they don't need to. But it
Mhm.
depends on the personality of the child. There's some other ones that are like, oh, like they go and they live their life all great. And there's the other ones that are kind of like, no, no, I got to help out and taking a lot of roles that don't belong to them. And that can be
Mhm.
very detrimental for themselves too.
Mhm. I can't believe how much you did. So I don't want to jump ahead, but I find it very interesting because you've obviously done a tremendous amount of work, to process a lot of this and understand a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that protector in you as early as you can remember? I mean, 6, 8, 10, 12, very early
Mm-hmm.
into those even more significant years in your teens. And then how did you see that play out in your adulthood? And at what point did you recognize that it was connected?
I got into not so great relationships. The first relationship that I had was great. My mom actually didn't like that person. But, the first relationship that I ever got was I was, 16 years old, and I met this guy that was just like my friend, and we were really great together, and it worked out. And, it was a really good relationship. But again, he also had a lot of depression issues, and I had my own depression issues. And so, like, it didn't work out because of that. he had to go find himself when I was 22 and he was 24. So we split, and then after that, I feel like I had a lot of like self sabotage. Like whenever I something bad would happen, I had a lot of like self sabotage. Like I would have to like I would like I need to be punished type of a thing. So, like I started getting into like relationships that were not so great for me. Like I just didn't, like I was literally discussing this with my therapist like a few days ago of, like getting into relationships that kind of like it was kind of fell in my lap, but I didn't really, I was kind of like, okay, yeah, you would do type of a things. Like, oh, you're a great person. Sure, that would work, but not really choosing people. It was kind of like, oh, you need help. Or, like granted, every single one of them had like mommy issues, some kind of like disconnect with our mother, which is kind of like something that later on I kind of put together into like every single person that I dated had some kind of like something that happened with their mothers. So there were things like that, like in therapy, I pieced together the attachment stuff, the kind of like why, like even with my, everything that happened with my ex-husband, after the divorce, like everything kind of like started, coming in together, into realizing like all of these things that, happened in my past, that, made me who I am. Kind of like you were saying, like, oh, I did a lot. To me, I did what needed to be done. It's kind of like somebody's
Yeah.
bleeding out. I mean, some people are going to run away from it. I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, so what do we do? Like, like, let's try and do something about it. That's
Yeah.
just my personality. It was kind of
Yeah.
like, if something is wrong, I'm going to jump in on it. So I think it kind of like I think that personality probably was there all along. So I don't know. Some people call it purpose in life, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it obviously suits you well, and helping is a wonderful thing. But as a child who's doing everything, it's just different, but it's we obviously are all products of what we lived through, and so you might have had that personality in you, but it was made bigger because you at a very young age were like, I can help everyone. I can take on everyone. I can take on everything. I can do everything that I need to.
Yeah.
What do you feel like when you look back, um, the the fact that you kind of were able to stand up to your mom where your sisters didn't, I think is a really interesting piece. Mainly because you didn't say you were 10 years older than your siblings. It sounds like you guys were just a couple years apart. So
Mhm.
the way you tell your story, it sounds like you were 15 and they were 5. But in
Mhm.
reality, how you said your next youngest sister is only like a year and a half or 2 years
Yeah,
younger.
just a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, a year
I
and
mean,
10 days actually.
that's actually
Mhm.
incredible, And so when you reflect back and you think about all of the pieces, to you, what do you think was the hardest piece to overcome or to recognize the connection into your adult life?
Well, I think all of that eventually weighs down on you. So by the time that I was 16 years old, and I also was undiagnosed ADHD. So, my neurodivergent brain just didn't really quite comprehend. I didn't get diagnosed until I was 33. And then life all of a sudden just made sense. But by 16 years old, and again, I don't know if I can say this, suicidal ideation, which I'll call
Mhm.
SI from now on. But I started having I didn't even know what that was. Obviously, there wasn't like the internet that we have today that I can like
Right.
look it up and see like what's going on with me. What is this, Claude? Like I don't have that, right. We didn't have that. So all I knew was that I just wanted to go in a hole, and I just like didn't want to live anymore. And so I remember going to my sister who was actually working, and I was kind of like, I can't live with mom anymore. Like if I stay here, I'm not gonna make it. And I didn't understand what I'm not gonna make it meant, like, but I was like, I'm just not gonna make it. So I remember going to my sister and I was like, look, like, can I have some money? Because at the time I didn't even have any money. And she was working. I was like, can I have some money for gas? Because I'm gonna go to my stepdad, the one my mom and my stepdad separated. So I'm like, I'm gonna go to his house. And so I went to his house and I told him, because they're like about an hour away from where we are at. Is that's where my grandma lives too. But I knew if I went to my grandmother, she was gonna send me right back to my mom. So I went to my stepdad and I was like, look, I can stay here, I can just run away. Like it's a choice that you guys are gonna have to make. Like I either stay here or run away. And like, like I'm gonna have to be a runaway. Like it's just not, I'm not going back. Like that's just not what's gonna happen. So it started weighing down on me quite a bit because I was like, I cannot live in this household anymore. I can't just be like, like being treated like crap and kind of like Cinderella over here. So it just like I couldn't do it. But then I made the choice because that severed my relationship with my sisters. So it's kind of like, like I eventually, like, they started to have survival, and they kind of carried, from my understanding or how I felt about it at least, was kind of like this kind of like upsetness over me because now they had to survive, and like,
Mhm.
actually, no, I'm not lying. Like, they did throw it in my face a few times, that now they had to survive by themselves, because I had left. So, but again, it was kind of like, it was survival again. It was,
Right.
the
Mhm.
survival thing is coming, open and over and over again here in the story, in that, like, I either stayed and I just was not gonna make it, but my sisters were going to, or I was just and eventually they wouldn't have me anyways, or I, had to go on my own. So yeah, I went out on my own. I got my first apartment when I was 17. So I, like, it was kind of, I don't see challenges. I'm just gonna like, oh, what's the problem? Let's do it. Like, I just keep going. It's kind of like, for a moment, I, like, lick my wounds, and then I'm like, okay, now we got to get up and like keep going because there's no
Yeah.
other way.
So you must have had a decent relationship with your stepfather if you went, you were comfortable enough to go to him in a very vulnerable space to
Mhm.
say, I need somewhere to be.
I he's the best person in the world. Like, he's just like,
Oh,
even to this day, like, I call him my daddy, and like, he's just the best. He's just a great person that, like, he has his own kids, and he just always took us in. He adopted us, and he just, like, pretty much just like, that's my daddy, and that's all of our daddy. Like, and they know him as Grandpa Danny, like our kids. So to me, like, I think, like, you always get some kind of person that's sent your way, and I think
mhm.
that was him. He was us for me. Like, he's a hermit. He's his own little weird person, and I love him to death. He's all like, also kind of like, oh, hands off, but like, he'll help you with anything. But he's kind of like, okay, 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 yeah, you don't have to say things. You're just, it's totally fine. Like,
Yeah.
again, another survival. He has his own stories of survival too. He's also a survival as well. So I think that he understood that part of kind of like not doing okay, and he knew my mom, so he understood where I was coming from as well.
Yeah. What a gift that you had him.
No, oh
You
yeah,
know,
for
when
sure.
when that's the mindset that you were at when you went to his door,
Hmm.
and that, I mean, wow, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah,
How
no,
wonderful.
yeah, no. Yeah.
So you said that that kind of caused a split with your sisters. Did that last for a long time, or what did that look like?
I don't think we've ever been the same. Like, we have never been the same. Like, I mean, they talk about me as kind of like, like, when we talk to our kids, like, they always talk about, like, pretty much like Leslie was like our mom, pretty much. So I didn't really have that chance, like, in my youngest sister, she's the most coherent one, I guess. But it's kind of like, she's also got like, she's kind of like that person like me, kind of like, okay, what are the sides here, and I'm gonna make my own opinion, type of a thing. So she got to see, like, like, it's, she went through a lot, like, like, it was a lot of pressure, like, that maybe she put it on herself. I don't think anybody put it on me, but it still was a lot of pressure no matter what.
Mhm.
So, and I did a lot for them, and it was very hard for me to understand later on, like, what my sister got into as she got, older, because like, in her teens, like, my mom would be like, oh, I'm a cool mom, and like, oh, oh yeah, she sneaks her boyfriend in the house, and oh my gosh, yeah, she has a bunch of bottles of alcohol under her bed, and like, she collects them, ha ha ha. And my sister says it herself. She's like, I didn't need a mom to be like that. I need a mom to mom, like, I didn't need a cool mom, like, kind of like in
Mhm.
that movie. I didn't need a cool mom. I needed a mom to parent me.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times, like, when I found out what she was doing years later, the type of stuff that she got into, like, I just broke down, because that's my baby, even though she's only like 4 years younger than me. To me, I was kind of like, I was not there to protect her, and that was really hard.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's like, she's my little sister. She's my little, she's my baby. I don't
Mhm.
care if she's only just a few years younger than me.
But I'm sure probably in therapy they remind you that that wasn't your
Oh yeah,
responsibility,
for sure.
you
Yeah. No,
know?
I worked for many years because I fought back my therapist so much. I was kind of like,
Yeah.
but who was going to do it? But that's not
Right.
your
Right.
responsibility. But who
Right.
was going to do it? Like, so it
I
was like
know.
back and forth all the time. And it took a long time to understand. And even, at times I'm kind of like, who, there was nothing else. It's like kind of
Yeah.
like, like a lot of the times, like they say like, oh, yell fire instead of yelling help because people are gonna help, and that
Right.
sucks. It's kind of
Yeah.
like people need help. And to
Yeah.
me, it's kind of like, I'm gonna help if that's what needs to be done. What needs to be
Yeah.
done needs to be done.
What I find really interesting is when there are multiple siblings, there is a lot of times what I think, and I don't know, you probably know better than me, the word, the parentification of a child, and which I think is exactly what happened to you.
Hmm.
And I think it's so fascinating because I think that parents sometimes, especially in divorce situations, overlook it because when you are divorced and remarried or not, I think that you still kind of take on, now it's you and your children type of thing. And so if you have one that steps up to be helpful,
Hmm.
it's helpful. It's, they take some of the burden off you because you don't have their other parent. And I think it's wonderful that you share this because what I see is that it took away from you a relationship with your sisters that could have been different. Your story is a beautiful example of how amazing you are and all the things you did for them.
Hmm.
But it is sad in the sense that when you tell that now, that it changed your relationship with them, and that is kind of the way it is today. At least it sounds like you still are in contact with them and you still see them,
Hmm.
but to not have a relationship with them, which is like three young girls who survived together,
Hmm.
that's a little bit different. But how lucky they are to have had you step in because, that example of her saying, I didn't need a cool mom, I needed a mom, at least in their younger years, you were there,
Hmm.
and you know, hopefully that they see that very
Oh yeah,
big
no.
sacrifice and benefit as
No, they
well.
did. I mean, they do see that, and they see that. When I learned the word parentification, that was like, oh my gosh, like this is
Yeah.
exactly it. And I think I try to share that with my mom, and obviously, like,
Yeah.
complete denial. It's like, that's not what it was. Okay,
Yeah.
so very much a Latino family of like, that's not how it is. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, but I felt very seen and identified. I was kind of like, yeah, that's exactly what
Yeah.
happened. Like that is, like, want it or not, like, like given or not, like that's exactly what happened. So
Mhm.
it helped me like understand a lot better of kind of like, oh yeah, okay, like this is not okay.
So when you look back and you mentioned you have gone through a divorce yourself
Hmm.
and you had, some difficult relationships leading up to that point. What do you think after all the work you've done is the greatest gift, blessing, non-negotiable that you feel like right now today you have a good grasp on
Hmm.
to make your life going forward better, that is a lesson kind of from everything that you've been through?
Not being responsible for other people. I learned that in the parallel parenting. When I started doing that, was a lot. It was a lot of that, because I understood that like this is not my responsibility. Other people, what they do or they don't do, it's going to affect my daughter. It's going to, but that's the other parent, and all I can do is to support her and be her home base and be the because like what I learned was that one parent, at least one parent, needs to be the home base and needs to be the one that kind of like it's the supportive and kind of like they feel sheltered with. So it doesn't always have to be both of them, and that's hard also to come about, because when you are the person that's always done the taking care of other people, it's really hard to like not want to do it. And it took a lot of practice for me, and it took a lot of like feeling guilty for like not doing that. But eventually I have so much peace in my life for doing so, for sure.
Wow. I mean, I think that parallel parenting may be one of the hardest things to do,
Hmm.
because it's so um it goes against your parenting intuition. Your
Hmm.
parent, there's nothing in this world where where we are supposed to believe that you parent by yourself. Obviously, we see people do it and we see people do it well, but if it takes two people to have a child, the innate feeling is that these people, even if they're not together, that they work together to raise a
Right.
child. And so I think parallel parenting, if people can do it successfully on both sides,
Mhm.
what an amazing accomplishment that is. And it's probably something that should be studied more and talked about more, because I think it's probably healthier in a lot of cases. I just don't think people can get there, if that makes sense, you know?
I mean, I think sometimes kind of like this, like we've been talking about, sometimes it's a survival, right? Like there's
Yeah.
no choice. You have no
Yeah.
other choice when the other parent is not being, like, kind. And it's just creating for, at one point I had to make the decision, do I want myself to be healthy and be okay with my daughter and my daughter not have to see this mother who's like falling apart? Or do I actually have to continue to like be in front of him and him doing all of these things? And so it was really hard decision to make, and I didn't even know what parallel parenting was. So I had to learn all of that. I had to learn, like, it was kind of like, okay, there's two different households and he can do whatever he wants and I can do whatever I want. And I still keep up with him on, like I let him know if like she's going to the doctor or she's doing anything. Like I still keep up with him and I let him know
Okay.
all of those things. But primarily in the beginning we had to have those like parenting apps, and we will only go through the parenting app because I wanted everything that he said to be in the parenting app that could be extracted if like we had to go to court or anything like that. And that's the other part, like I was promised a much different divorce. Like it was very hurtful because it's like, hey, you promised me a divorce that was going to be smooth, it was going to be about the child only, and here I am every single time that I'm trying to tell you something about the kid, you're coming and telling me all of these other things that are just here to hurt me. Like this is not what we signed up for. We signed up for like both of us doing well and being here for our child. And it just wasn't like that. So at one point I had to decide, like, no, I'm sorry, like you don't get to have access to me anymore. We're going to talk only about the child, and you're going to do what you need to do at your house and I'm going to do what I need to do at my house. I trust that you're going to have the best interest of the child when she's at your house, and you know that I am. So that was hard. Like not returning clothes and things like that. Like it was kind of like really hard to get through all of that. Now we're in a better place, I think, because I had to set all of these boundaries
Mhm.
for sure.
What now does your relationship with your mother and your father look like after all this time?
So it is still very hard, like even with my sisters, like, it's hard to speak with my mom. My mom kind of like has it, it's all about like her and what she wants. And she tries to control your life all the time. But with my dad, I just haven't been able since the divorce. Again, since I expected to have a good divorce, and then all of this Pandora's box opened up in front of me. I was kind of, everything just started bringing back memories of like how my dad was exactly the same during the
Wow.
divorce, and doing a lot of the same things that my ex-husband was doing, and being like, hurtful and manipulative. So I started learning a little bit more about that, and then I got to understand a lot more about it. I got to like go through the DSM, which is our diagnostic thing, and I was like, oh, this meets up a lot of this makes a lot of sense. So that's how I got into like knowing more about parallel parenting, Dr. Ramani, and things like that. And so I got to understand, and so I haven't been able to speak with them for the past 3.5 years because I'm still very much hurt
Mhm.
into kind of like, I got into the same relationship because of both of my parents, right? Like I always told my ex-husband, I'm like, I married my mother. I married my mother because he's very critical. He's always criticizing. He's always negative. He's always, like all of these things. But I didn't see I also married my father. And so after the divorce, I realized, wait a minute, like
Mhm.
I also married my father. And so it was really hard to come to terms with that.
I
Still
think that do you think it's hard because you feel like you should have known better? Why do you think it's so hard?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of like understanding really what happened and how it happened and coming to
Mhm.
terms with that as well,
Yeah.
into better understanding.
I do think that with your experience your life experience, but also your work experience. I always like to end my podcast asking people if they have ever read, a book that they think they could tell other people about that was life changing or that was impactful or that was just a beautiful story. And I'm just wondering if you have a book recommendation for anyone who might be listening that hits on any of this, or maybe is just, like I said, a beautiful story that made you happy. But if you have anything, I'd love for you to share it.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I have a whole, you can't see it, but it's a whole collection of books that I have. I love reading. But definitely, Dr. I think I can never say her name, Dr. Romani. It's Not You was a really great, book. And I know that I read her other book, like should I leave or should I stay or should I go? It's another book that she has, which I actually read while I was still living with him, but it didn't compute. Again, it just didn't add up. Like it just didn't. I was in such a fantasy world that it just didn't click that I had just read her book and that it all made sense, because to me it's like, no, like narcissist, like I don't, this doesn't make sense. So those two books, and then the parallel parent, what do I have, what else do I have, parallel parenting, was also great. And I mean, I have quite a bit of books that I love, like the art of not giving a F,
Yep.
is
Yep.
actually, good. And, there's a lot of books out there, I think, that just bring you back to who you are. And I think, if you want humor, like Jen Sincero is a really, great book of kind of like, coming back into like funny parts of
Yeah.
it, and coming back into yourself. So there's all kinds of different books that I think are very important for people to read. Different podcasts, of course, that are very helpful. Help is always out there. And
Yes.
so, like asking, people for help, I think is the most important part. It's kind of like being honest and vulnerable. You don't, the great thing is like now we have like Claudes and the things of the world that like we don't, a lot of times like asking another human can be very
Yeah.
vulnerable, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of access to a lot of different things. Obviously don't make Claude your therapist. That's
Right.
not, that's not a good thing. But it can be there in moments when you're really like, falling apart. I know that if it wasn't for YouTube, I don't know how I would have survived the first two
Wow.
years after, because
Wow.
there was so much information available that really like made me feel like, okay, I'm not a crazy person. Like this is actually happening. This is what's going on. It made sense of a lot of things. But then I also tell everyone, I was like, be careful, because a lot of times you can get into this rabbit hole into like too much information, and too
Yes.
much information can create the backwards, like going backwards into this thing of like, now you're trapped into this box of like victimhood.
Yes.
So it's good to move forward with information, but be careful when you're, dipping into the like victimhood of like, oh my gosh, all these bad things happened to me. And, it's like, yeah, they happened to you, but they happen for you too. As hard or cliche as that
Yeah.
sounds.
No, I think that's a big thing, that life does happen for you. If you
Mhm.
can see it that way, then you find the beauty in even the hard. Um, did you ever come across the book called Out of the Fog?
That sounds familiar. I think I read that on in Kindle when
Yeah. Yeah.
or yeah, like
Yeah.
very early on too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a good one too.
Yeah. And I know
Um,
that Louise Hay in the beginning when I first was going through like kind of like my transition, when I first started working on myself in like 2014, um I Louise Hay was very helpful into kind of helping me understand like you chose your parents type of a thing, like where I know like she can be kind of controversial too, but I feel like that part, at least for me, it helped me, because it was kind of like not the part that like, okay, you chose your parents, but like they just did the best that they could with what
right.
they had available. And as I started looking into their lifelines, and I started talking to my grandparents and what their lives were like, and I better understood my grandparents and how they were parents to my parents, I understood a whole lot of things into like that anger, because I used to be very, very, very angry all the time. That anger kind of like subsided because I, humanized them. To
Yeah.
me, they were kind of like not, like not in that human state, of kind of like, oh, you deserve that compassion because you hurt me so much, and like what you did, you could have done better. Like there, you can always go in that direction of like kind of like you should have done better, you should have seen it. But when you humanize them, you recognize they're people. And I always tell everyone, like, we put our parents on a pedestal, but that's not where they belong. They're still humans. And I teach my daughter
Right.
that all the time. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to cry. I'm going to do all kinds of stuff because I'm still a human. I may be your mom, but I don't know all of the solutions. I don't know
Right.
all of the answers. So
Yeah.
if I don't know the answer, I'm going to let you know I don't know the answer, and we're
Yeah.
going to work it together. But, you
Yeah.
can't put me on a pedestal.
Right. I mean, what your story is ultimately is your ability to self-reflect and how that has taught you so much from what you experienced. And now, I mean, you say you're 42, like that's old, but you're so young, and I can understand why you feel like you've lived a long time in 42
Mhm.
years. Um, but to have processed so much of this and to have the insight that you have and to only be 42 and to be able to look forward, I mean, what a gift that you've given yourself,
Oh,
in that, which is very hard work to do. It's very hard to go back and process it all. So I commend you for that. I thank you for sharing your story. I think that if people listen, it will give them a reason to dig a little deeper because they can get to a better place. And I think it's a wonderful thing for people to know.
yeah, no, and I like what you just said because yes, 42, 32, 28, it doesn't matter how old you are. Like sometimes you feel like you lived like 40 lifetimes, but I'm really looking forward to my 50s, my 60s because like we can get better each time.
Well, thank you so much for your time
Right.
today. I just appreciate it so much and your vulnerability to share your story because what you've accomplished is wonderful.
Oh, thank you. No, I really love what you're doing here. I'm really glad that you had this. I wish I knew about this a little bit earlier, but I think it's so great for everyone to go through. I know I looked through a lot of your stuff and it really like helped to see that other people, have gone through
Yeah.
similar things. And it helped me too as a mom, right? Going through the same thing of kind of like, how can I do better for my child in my own divorce? Because I don't want, I've seen some stories in your podcast that I'm kind of like, oh, I can see how that could affect my daughter. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. So it helps on both ends, the people who are going through it and the people who have gone through it as a child and the people who are going through it as an adult now to try and do better for the kids. So
Yeah.
you're helping a whole lot of people for
Aw,
sure.
thank you
So
so
thank
much
you.
for sharing that. That makes me feel so good. I really appreciate
I
that.
know, of course. Well, it was nice meeting you. So thank you
You
for having
too.
me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in. Together we can shape healthier paths for families to do divorce better. See you next time on In Between Them.